Tonight on Politicat, we are live in Milwaukee for the Democratic debate between former Secretary of State Hillary Clinton and Senator Bernie Sanders. We're going to take a look back in New Hampshire and the landslide victories there on both sides of the aisle, and we'll have a quick, brief look at what's happening moving forward in Nevada and South Carolina. It's Politicat, it's live, it's right now. And good evening. Welcome to this live special edition of Politicat. I'm Jesse Kirsch, reporting tonight from Milwaukee on the campus of the University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee, just ahead of the Democratic debate between former Secretary of State Hillary Clinton and Vermont Independent Senator Bernie Sanders. We're here and we're in Evanston, and we're keeping you up to date on everything in this 2016 presidential race. Things got very interesting over the weekend and last week in New Hampshire as Bernie Sanders came away with probably his biggest victory thus far, a landslide blowout win in the New Hampshire primary. But things are already heating up, moving forward in this Democratic fight to the finish as he is becoming more and more viable as a national candidate. And tonight there were people all out in full force in Milwaukee to voice their opinion ahead of tonight's debate.
Love water, not oil. Not oil.
I used to be real idealistic. I used to actually believe politicians told you the truth. They make promises like free college and free Medicaid. That's what the Democratic Party stands for.
What would you say to someone who says Hillary's getting, the older crowd, Bernie's getting the younger?
I'm shocked. We're the middle class, and that's where Bernie Sanders stands out. He's somebody we trust. He's somebody that's trying to help the middle class as it's shrinking away, and that's why we're supporting Bernie Sanders.
Protesters have been gathering here since about 5:30 when we first arrived, and the crowd has grown ever since. There are people for both candidates and people who just want to have their voices heard ahead of tonight's debate and the 2016 election.
We had Fight for 15 workers have been following candidates all across the country. We had the first time ever strikes in Iowa before the primary. We had the first time ever strikes in New Hampshire with fast food workers. We had fast food workers on strike in Charleston along with home care workers and child care workers. They want two things: $15 in a union. They don't care if you're Democrat or Republican, or if you're running for dog catcher or you're running for president. They're going to support the candidate that supports the 64 million people in this country that make less than $15 and are living in poverty.
After we were outside with the protesters in about 20-degree weather, a group of the Fight for 15 protesters made their way into the media area, actually pushing through some of the security. So we have footage of that. We'll get it to you at a later time. But we just want to keep you up to date that the protesters are really trying to make their voices heard tonight. Now I want to bring in NNN's political analyst and former president of the College of Democrats at Northwestern, Quentin Howrunner. And Quentin, this is starting to shape up to be a very interesting race between these two candidates.
It certainly is.
And when we take a look at a couple of the things that have stood out this week, right off the top today, former Secretary Clinton getting the endorsement of the Congressional Black Caucus, that doesn't mean that the fight for the minority vote is anywhere near being over, is it?
It certainly isn't, but it doesn't change the fact that Hillary Clinton has sort of built up a firewall with a lot of non-white voters that, Senator Sanders has had a lot of success reaching out to the core of his base, which is wealthy white liberals. And while that's very, very powerful and helps you in states like Iowa, like New Hampshire, it's not going to swing it in South Carolina. It's not going to be enough in Nevada. It's not going to be enough in the Super Tuesday states. And so he's definitely quite desperate to reach out to voters beyond that core that's carried him so far.
And we talk about how the voting blocks have been splitting so far. Everyone's talking about the youth vote going to Senator Sanders, but we also, you just saw a minute ago, there are people who are well out of that youth vote range voting for Senator Sanders, and vice versa for former Secretary Clinton. So is there any way to actually break down the way these voting trends are going, especially when you take a look at an independent in the race for the Democratic nomination?
There still is, and while it's not quite as simple as a lot of people say, it doesn't change the fact that Senator Sanders has had incredible success with young voters, even more than Barack Obama did, if you can believe it, in 2008. Likewise, Senator Clinton has been polling ahead of Senator Sanders, Secretary Clinton has been polling ahead of Senator Sanders by an immense margin for minority voters, for a lot of poorer voters. And while it's going to be breaking down very, very differently than 2008 did, it nonetheless looks like this race will once again pit two factions of the Democratic Party against each other.
I want to take you to Tuesday's vote in New Hampshire. It was not a surprise that Senator Sanders came away with the win. They were calling it basically as soon as the polls closed. That wasn't a surprise. Does that mean that Secretary Clinton can just shrug that off? It sounds like the establishment and a lot of the top donors and other advocates within the Democratic organization are still trying to push her to kind of reinvigorate her campaign.
Well, the big problem is that, on one hand, certainly she can, for the most part, write off the results of last Tuesday. She lost New Hampshire, but everyone knew she was going to lose New Hampshire, and so the fact that she lost the state shouldn't be a huge blow to the campaign. However, the fact that she was in a position where she could give up New Hampshire, and she says, well, Senator Sanders is, representing Vermont in Congress. He's right next door. They've known him for a long time. It doesn't change the fact that this is the state that resuscitated her campaign in 2008. It doesn't change the fact that this is a state that gave Bill Clinton his 1992 comeback second place showing in his first campaign for the presidency. And so, at a certain point, even though her defeat was expected and therefore shouldn't on its own be taken as a sign that her campaign's in trouble, the fact that her campaign wrote off New Hampshire so far out before the actual voting happened is definitely a sign that she should recalibrate her message if she wants to reach out to that Sanders demographic.
Now, looking at the Republican side of this race, Donald Trump, not surprising, he came away with a huge landslide win in New Hampshire last week, but John Kasich came up with second place, and today he came away with one of Republican governor from New Jersey, Chris Christie's key donors, who switched teams, so to speak, after Chris Christie dropped out of the race. So does this mean that the establishment's going to now start to rally around John Kasich?
I very highly doubt it. Senator Rubio's already had endorsements from people like Tim Scott, the senator from South Carolina, who's one of the rising stars in the Republican Party. He's certainly not going to switch allegiances after just one bad debate and one bad showing. Kenneth Langone, the CEO of Home Depot, who was previously a major donor to Christie's campaign and who's now switched to Team Kasich, is a very, very important get for the Kasich organization. Kasich is also endorsed by the governor of Alabama, Robert Bentley, which is a surprise considering that Kasich has generally been considered a moderate in the race, and Alabama is a very conservative state. But Jeb Bush has an immense amount of money, immense amount of influence, and Marco Rubio still seems to be the choice of a lot of elected officials within the Republican Party. And so while Kasich has now successfully inserted himself into being one of the three finalists for being the anti-Cruz, anti-Trump, that battle for him is far from over, especially looking towards South Carolina, where he is not looking very good in the polling.
Well, it sounds like there's still plenty in store in the future, so I want to bring in NNN's Fallon Gallagher, who joins Quentin in Evanston tonight. And Fallon, in 2012, it was Romney and Obama winning in South Carolina. The Democrats have Nevada before South Carolina, but all eyes seem to be on the South now. We've talked about a couple of the minority voting groups. Those blocks are going to be a big part of that night. There seems to be a lot in store in the near future.
Thanks, Jesse. With a Democratic debate in Wisconsin tonight, the spotlight is on Hillary and Bernie as they prepare for the typically lower stakes Nevada caucus. After Hillary's slight victory in Iowa and overwhelming defeat in New Hampshire, what can we expect looking forward to Nevada?
Well, one of the interesting things to me is that Nevada has been considered such a lower tier state, that it's Iowa, New Hampshire, and South Carolina that get the focus as the early states, even though Nevada's the only one of those three states with a large Hispanic population, even though Nevada is a second caucus state, while New Hampshire and South Carolina are both primary states. And as such, I've personally been a little bit confused why Nevada is generally considered to be of less importance. And I think that if Senator Sanders wants to continue his momentum, knowing that he's probably not going to do well in South Carolina, at least if I were in his campaign, I would advise play in Nevada, play hard. As a caucus state, it rewards enthusiasm, it rewards organization, and it rewards energy with the volunteers you have. And I think all of those three things are ones that Senator Sanders' campaign has been able to do very, very well on so far.
Like Bernie, Donald Trump also did considerably well in the New Hampshire with 35.3% of the vote, a considerable margin compared to runner-up John Kasich's 15.8%. What do you think this victory will do for his campaign?
Well, I think this means that Donald Trump, as much as so many people did not want to admit it, is for real. After underperforming his polling in Iowa, there were, rumors that this was it, that the Trump campaign was all sound and very little actual effect. And what we've seen in New Hampshire is that while Iowa was the result of a bad ground game and of probably skipping that debate right beforehand, Winning 35% of the vote in New Hampshire is a big, big deal. He won by a margin of nearly 20%. He over doubled John Kasich's results. And so it's official that the Republican Party needs to look at Donald Trump as, if not the presumptive nominee, at least as the undisputed frontrunner for the nomination.
But Marco Rubio didn't excel in New Hampshire. After criticism of his nearly robotic debate performances, Rubio defensively turned to a well-rehearsed argument about President Obama's liberal agenda during Saturday night's debate, resulting in a fall to 5th place. Does Rubio still stand a chance at being the frontrunner in this race?
I think that we do need to dismiss this fiction that Marco Rubio knows what he's doing. In a lot of ways, Marco Rubio has no idea what he's doing. He was anointed as the Republican sort of savior, literally in the words of Time magazine. A lot of the Republican establishment rallied around his campaign the moment he had an unexpectedly good third place finish in Iowa. But the fact is that Marco Rubio has a long, long way to go to get Jeb Bush and John Kasich out of the race, and it's not clear that he'll be able to do that.
Well, Rubio still is in the race, which is more than we can say about the other GOP hopefuls. Both Chris Christie and Carly Fiorina announced the suspension of their campaigns, but this February, what is that going to do for the primaries?
Well, it means the establishment vote is a little bit, there are fewer people to choose from.
Well, I guess we'll see how the candidates fare as they head to the South for the South Carolina caucus on February 23rd. Back to you, Jesse.
All right, thank you, Fallon and Quentin. So we're going to step aside now as the debate is just about to take place. We'll have more coverage on the Northwestern News Report on Tuesday night. From Milwaukee, I'm Jesse Kirsch. Good night.